Everyone knows the Pentagon. Over the years, it's become an international symbol and an American icon. But that's almost an accident. It was built in a rush to meet a looming crisis. Its shape was determined by circumstance. It was supposed to be a temporary headquarters for the Army. Early 1941, Hitler's stormtroopers had already overrun Eastern Europe and invaded Russia. Japan's armies were pushing even further into the Asian mainland. Despite strong domestic opposition, U.S. military leaders were already gearing up for America's anticipated entry into the war. Army offices were scattered through 17 buildings in Washington, D.C. To disguise the increasing military presence, officers and NCOs reported to work in civilian clothes. That included General Brehon Burke Somerville, head of Army construction. His solution to the Army's space problem: build the biggest office building in the world across the Potomac River in Virginia.
He brought his staff together on this Thursday night in July 1941 and just gave them these instructions. I want a building big enough to house 40,000 people with parking for 10,000 cars, 4 million square feet, and I want the plans on my desk Monday morning.
The original plan for the Pentagon was drawn up over a long weekend. The original site was bounded by roads that required that the building, to be within those roads, would be a Pentagon, but a rather irregular one.
That original site was on farmland along Memorial Drive, the road that still leads into Arlington National Cemetery. But there was controversy. Critics loudly complained the huge new building would mar the view from the tomb of Pierre L'Enfant, designer of the layout of Washington. President Roosevelt picked a new site in a marshy area about a half-mile downriver. Former Second Lieutenant Bob Furman saw the area before a shovel of earth was turned.
Back of where I'm standing was a development of homes. In back of the Pentagon on the south side was a big brickyard, many acres in here of experimental agricultural work, and a railroad ran right through the middle of it.
The location may have changed, but the design concept didn't.
They were moving so quickly with the project that the architects just decided to keep that five-sided shape. The new site down here wasn't five-sided, but there really wasn't time to change it.
General Somerville, nicknamed Dynamite in a Tiffany box, helped push quick congressional approval of the new War Department building, as it was first called.
He didn't tolerate anything which didn't get the job done immediately.
Ground was broken on September 11, 1941, just 7 weeks since the idea of the building was first proposed. That night, President Roosevelt went on the radio to warn of the threat from Germany.
When you see a rattlesnake poised to strike, you do not wait until he is struck before you crush him.
The goal was to begin moving people into the building within 6 months. Less than 3 months after groundbreaking, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on a Sunday morning.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
We knew that the world had changed.
Helen McShane Bailey, she was Helen McShane then, was one of thousands of young women moving to Washington to take federal jobs. She still recalls the drastic change she saw at her office in the War Department when she went to work the day after the attack.
And I walked up to my office, and as I'm coming in, I'm seeing all these men who used to wear civilian clothes are now in Army uniforms with their ranking insignia on their shoulders, and I was in shock, and they were in shock.
Pearl Harbor changed everything. All restrictions were off, money rolled, and the construction effort speeded up tremendously. At the peak, there were about 15,000 people working on the building around the clock.
Construction workers flocked to Washington from across the country. The building was to be 4 floors and made of reinforced concrete with no steel beams. More than 41,000 90-foot pilings were driven into the ground to support the structure. 5.5 million cubic yards of sand and dirt were pumped from the river to raise the building level above the floodplain. The Pentagon went up in sections, later called wedges. As one wedge was nearing completion, another was started. Hundreds of draftsmen were working all hours in an old airplane hangar, cranking out design plans for the building as it was being built.
They were working so fast they were getting ahead of the plans. The plans sometimes delivered after they'd already done some of the work on them. The result is you do have some irregularities inside. Years later it was discovered that there were some pockets in the building that were completely sealed off and nobody knew about.
It was conceived as a gash in the ground, a wound in the earth. The designer envisioned a polished granite surface that would reflect life in death. Their engraved names would be a powerful memorial to those who died too young. The Vietnam veteran who pushed for its creation wanted to find a way to heal embattled and embittered veterans and to help soothe a society still divided by a controversial conflict. But no one foresaw that from its opening in 1982, people would come to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and leave mementos.
There's teddy bears and high school rings and old photographs that mamas bring.
Large and small, personal and military, obvious and mysterious. Offerings at the wall.
There's combat boots he used to wear when he was sent over there. And there's 50,000 names carved in the wall.
Dory Felton has been the only curator all this has ever had. He's a wounded Vietnam veteran himself who recognized objects no one else understood.
I knew what they were. I said, you know, those are military pajamas, that's a souvenir sword from Thailand, whatever.
There's a great deal of whatever in the thousands of plastic boxes where most of the objects are stored. They range from elaborate, carefully prepared offerings to notes written on the spur of the moment on brown paper bags.
I surmised that someone probably came to the wall, overcome with emotions, and they had to put this down in chapter and verse. This is great literature in this collection. This is first-hand accounts. It is unedited. It will punch you in the stomach. But this collection is also a celebration of life.
There are favorite foodstuffs and clothing, alcohol and cigarettes, birthday cards and Easter baskets. Sometimes there are explanatory notes. More often, there are not.
There's an empty champagne bottle and 2 goblets, but there's no message, no photographs. And I've often wondered if this was dreams deferred. There's so many stories that you could probably visualize.
In the spring of 2010, the VFW posted a $1 million bond so the Park Service would let Hogman bring the bike back to Wisconsin to restore it to its original condition. New tires, a repaint job, and careful touch-ups of small dings and details.
What year does that order say?
The bike was shown at a Vietnam Veterans Homecoming observance in Wisconsin, then returned to the collection over Memorial Day weekend.
The Park Service might be holding on to it, but it belongs to the guys on the wall, our buddies that didn't come back from Vietnam. This is their bike. Anytime we're out for a ride, they're riding right next to us on this.
I asked them, I said, I have a person in my family that is in the war in Iraq now, and I know that they don't get to come home very often and see their people. And I know back then that y'all had no choice to go over there, and y'all never knew when y'all was going to get shot.
I wrote, Dear Vietnam soldier, trooper. Thank you for all you did for our country and risking your lives to save the United States.
The letter writing and the trip started under social studies teacher Shirley Royals, now retired. When her classes researched the places to visit on the very first trip, the students saw pictures of mementos left at the wall.
And the children were just curious as to why people did this and to whom they were left. And we would talk about, a lot were family and family members, and some were actually leaving them to relatives that are deceased. And from that, we came up with the idea that they could write their own letter to leave as a keepsake.
Teachers and students alike come back touched by the act of placing the letters at the wall and actually seeing the memorial.
There was a lot of emotions just walking past the wall, like sadness and a lot of stuff.
They're very calm because they know what it represents, and they're just walking and like just running their hands down the wall too as they go, and then looking at some of the names.
A lot of them walk up to the wall and they want to touch it and feel it, and I don't know if that's just their concrete way of saying this is actually a real thing. These are real people that were alive at one time and now they're gone or not here, or they don't know what happened to them.
Well, I thought, well, that's a lot of soldiers, and, well, I felt bad because all of them soldiers lost their life or they got lost.
I was amazed because I didn't know that many people had fought and died in the war.
The children choose whether to leave their letters along the wall or put them in a container at the apex.
My grandpa, he fought in the Vietnam War. And when we put it down, I almost was gonna cry because when he had died 2 months ago, and remembering him was actually sad.
The names of 9 men from Laurinburg are engraved.
I have a list of the local people that are deceased and their names are on the wall, and I always try to place one of the letters close to that location.
Dear Tyler, my wife and I.
In 2010, a response. Richard Vasdias, a Vietnam veteran and retired schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, picked up Tyler Bird's letter, read it, and wrote back.
You and your classmates have done a wonderful thing to write to us, old-timers.
Tyler's one of the handful of military kids in South Scotland. His father is deployed to Iraq.
I included the Army because my dad's in the Army, and I just thought that'd be interesting if somebody got to read it. And I talked about their freedom because I wanted to thank you about freedom.
Richard Vasdias flew Marine helicopters in 1965 and 66, but he didn't spend many words on his Vietnam service. Instead, he asked Tyler about himself.
Do you like music? Do you play a sport? Do you like a sport? Tell me a specific player you like off that team.
It's become an educational device for people who have no recollection of Vietnam. Half of the people who visit the memorial are literally younger than the memorial. They are younger than age 25. I mean, forget the Vietnam War. That's even longer.
The South Scotland elementary school letters will wind up at the warehouse in Maryland, where they'll be stored away for researchers and museum curators down the road, along with items like this perfectly good guitar missing one string that showed up with no explanation.
So again, the viewers may contrive their own stories as to why it was left.